I hope you're going to be willing to take some questions, some comments and thoughts. Can I use my prerogative to ask you the first question? What lessons do you think are behind the US posture in Libya, where there is clearly a very different kind of approach being taken to that was prevalent in the Bush administration?
Yeah, I hope that one of the lessons for Libya is that if the United States, well, I think one that is obvious is that we have worked with our allies, and we have, in fact, sought out our allies' support, advice, and influence in the matters of the Middle East and particularly in Libya. So I think that the United States realizes that allies are not just nice, they're absolutely necessary. And two, I think that the Obama administration, even though I might have preferred that he had done things a lot quicker, I think that the sense is we are going to let things there develop as organically as possible, because the United States is not going to lead efforts and is not going to have a heavy hand in what's happening in Libya, because we do not want to end up having to pick up the pieces. So I think those are two lessons that already I've seen.
Is that an Obama doctrine in review?
You know, I don't think that, I would say that Obama really has a doctrine. Maybe it's something that's kind of emerging, that's in play, but so far he's been very cautious in foreign policy and trying to play both sides, if not all sides, of the spectrum in terms of foreign policy. Go ahead.
Thank you for are you going? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Please, go ahead, please.
Thank you for an interesting lecture. My name is Patrice McMahon, and I'm working for ICO here. I would like to look at the picture what you painted from the little different point of view. You're actually talking about the foreign policy of Democrats and Republicans in the United States. Mm-hmm. And it's not about very difficult for me to guess who you're voting for. So, if you look at it from that perspective, I would be much more interested in looking at the first Iraq war with Papa Bush and the second Iraq war with his son. Because I think that if you look at these two different Republican approaches, there you see the differences. Because my argument would be that many of the way you say Clinton administration and Bush administration draw different lessons from Bosnia. Mm-hmm. Of course they did. There are two different party politics and two different constituencies which they are serving in their own country. So, however, but if you look at how two different Republican administrations use different tactics against Iraq, I think that that's where we start to get to the point that we understand that what are the real lessons now.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. And in fact, what you're saying is it's not about Democrats or Republicans, because there were many Republicans, and in fact, I'm a registered independent. So I'm hoping not. I mean, of course, it's very difficult to be totally objective about these issues. But I think Senior had a very different take-home point about Bosnia and Kosovo, and would not have done what Junior did. And in fact, many of his foreign policy advisors were trying to counsel Junior, George W. Bush, about what ought to be done, and that in fact the Senior was abiding by the Powell Doctrine and not trying to get extensively involved in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq. So I think you're right, it's not about, it is to some degree about individuals and who the president, who these presidents surrounded themselves with. Senior, who had an extremely long history of foreign policy, also surrounded himself with people with a lot of history in foreign policy, but people with very different perspectives on foreign policy. Junior, I don't want to say Junior's here, it doesn't, but the younger Bush administration, someone who had very little foreign policy experience and did not surround himself with people with diverse views. So when these issues were coming up, there was an attempt from people within his father's administration to try to counsel him in a very different direction in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I totally agree with you. This is not about Republicans and Democrats. And in fact, you see more divisions within the Republican Party about what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq than you do in terms of Republicans and Democrats. I agree.
I happen to agree with my predecessor who wrote the question that I think you maybe put too much emphasis on the ideology of the political parties. Because we know that the Clinton administration was very much involved in the conflicts in the Balkans and not so much involved in the intervention in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But my question will be, is really Bosnia a success? I mean, what do you see Bosnia today? I mean, do you really see the state surviving as a state? And if it doesn't survive, can you call this a successful nation building? And also, do you really see the nation building completed in Kosovo? We all know that we had something that happened here in 2004 that really expedited the process of declaration of independence in Kosovo. And then it was an intervention from the United States and diplomatic intervention to really move this process forward. And I don't think that you can compare the conflicts in Bosnia and Kosovo with those in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Location definitely is one of the points. Size is definitely one of the points. But also the population, the way they receive that.
Absolutely.
And I don't see the intervention as an organic development, because we know that this, if you really let this organic development happen, you have 300,000 people dead, like we had in Bosnia. Because we could intervene in Bosnia in 91, but we waited until 1995. So to have this organic development happening, whereas people in Bosnia were being killed. And the lesson learned in Bosnia, the conflict in Bosnia started in 1991, 92.
Right,
Intervention happened in 1995. Because we wanted to wait and see how this coalition building was happening, how we could get our allies on board and blah, blah, blah. 3 or 4 years. Whereas the war was happening in Bosnia, massacres and everything. In Kosovo, we learned the lesson that we cannot wait, and we intervened much quicker. So we saved a lot of lives. No, so these are, I think, we compare in not maybe very, very good cases between the two countries, and Afghanistan and Iraq. You do have a very good point making that we had something like 9/11 happen also that changed the mentality. I was in DC, and Maya from Pentagon when this happened, and I know that what kind of impact had this in people. So I don't think that Bush Jr., as you call it, before 9/11 was the same as Bush post 9/11. So that had the shape of foreign policy in the United States.
Okay,
So,
let me just start with your first point about success. Yeah, I would say that Bosnia is a success. The violence was stopped, the ethnic cleansing was stopped. Is it perfect now? Absolutely not. No, a fellow from Brčko just the other day at Chapel Hill, we had a workshop on the Balkans, and he was saying, is Bosnia a success? I live in Bosnia, I live in Brčko. Brčko is probably the success story in terms of the place that you can look at that's multi-ethnic, that's economically developing. Brčko is different from Mostar, but yes, if I had to say, is it a success or a failure? It is. It's not perfect. The RS still would like to secede. Do I think it's going to happen? Do I think violence is going to happen? No, I don't. In fact, one of the major criticisms of the foreign affairs piece was that people were saying, oh, you're saying that violence is going to happen in Bosnia. We were saying no. We were not saying that violence is going to happen, but what we were trying to advocate was for the United States to stay focused on the Balkans, which relates to, I think, your second point. Do I think state building is done in Kosovo? Absolutely not. Do I think it's done in Bosnia? Absolutely not. I guess to your third point, in terms of organic process, I think what we did was we intervened. Our interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan were not about the people asking or getting massacred and wanting the United States to help out, to help them out. I think they're very different situations. And that's why I was trying to contrast.
That's why we can compare them also. I mean, in the very same approach that you took.
Right, but what the United States, we thought we had learned about Bosnia was when people are getting massacred, do not wait. And hopefully we did intervene earlier in Kosovo than we did in Bosnia. We waited much too long for that. So I hope that was the take-home point. With Iraq and Afghanistan, there was nothing about waiting. It was preemptive. It wasn't about waiting because people were getting. If we wanted to really help out, we could have and should have helped out much earlier for the people who were being cleansed in the genocide that was happening. So it wasn't for human rights purposes. These were not humanitarian interventions. You're right, they were very different cases. Then my point is for administration or for policymakers to say, well, these same lessons that we learned in Bosnia and in the Balkans will help us and apply to Afghanistan and Iraq. That's what was happening within the Bush administration, saying, well, we did this happened. But in fact, because there was not legitimacy because these were not humanitarian interventions. As a result of that, it was very different. It was very different. And when they heard any evidence that was contrary to what they wanted or expected in those cases, they ignored it. They blatantly ignored it.
I have a general question similar to one we just heard, in that it sort of fascinates me that we should be so concerned about comparing the Balkans, Eastern Europe, with Afghanistan, Central Asia, Iraq, in that you're talking about two things in a way. We're talking about state building, but in one sense really, we're talking about post-conflict resolution. And so the one thing about the three areas we're discussing here, in that, sure, it's all happened in the last 10 or 15 years, it's been in the headlines every day, we're all concerned about it, but sort of, I'm wondering if it's misleading, sort of comparing the Balkans with Iraq and Afghanistan, in that if it's state building, why not look at any other part of the world, be it South America, Africa, Asia? State building is just one of the incredible, huge issues which, you know, the UN and everyone else is struggling about it. But what we're talking about really is the post-conflict resolution, where these